You feel it, don't you? That quiet fear sitting in your chest, the anxiety before something even happens, the overthinking, the what ifs, the worst case scenarios playing again and again in your mind. But here's the truth most people never realize. Nothing has actually happened yet, and still you suffer. Seneca once said, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." Think about that. How many times have you been afraid of something only to realize later it wasn't even that bad, or worse, it never even happened at all? Your mind creates illusions. It turns small problems into massive threats. It builds fear out of nothing. And the real danger, you start living like those fears are real. You avoid opportunities. You stay silent when you should speak. You hold back not because reality stopped you, but because your imagination did. Rule 2 is about breaking that illusion. It's about seeing fear for what it truly is. A story your mind tells, not a truth you must obey, because once you understand this, you stop being controlled by fear, and you start controlling your life. Jack London was a man who was never content with the ordinary. He yearned for adventure and new experiences, always seeking to push himself to the limits. But this intrepid spirit also had a darker side, his imagination. It was a double-edged sword that both drove him forward and held him back. In his youth, London had worked in factories, on fishing boats, and in other grueling jobs to support himself. He also spent time riding the rails, hoboing across the country, and getting into fights. These experiences provided the material for his later novels and shaped his worldview. London's big break came in 1899 with the publication of his novel The Call of the Wild. The book was an instant success, earning him critical acclaim and financial stability. But London was not content to rest on his laurels. He wanted to experience firsthand the adventures that he wrote about. It was then that London decided to embark on a journey to the Klondike region of Canada, where he planned to join the gold rush. It was an adventure that would test his limits and push him to his very edge. He was excited, but he was also scared. London had read stories of the harsh conditions and dangers that awaited him, and his imagination ran wild with all sorts of scenarios. He imagined himself stranded in the wilderness, alone and helpless, or falling through the ice and drowning in freezing water. He imagined being attacked by wild animals or robbed by bandits. His mind conjured up all sorts of terrifying scenarios, and he was unable to shake them off. As he traveled through the wilderness, his fears and anxieties only grew. He became convinced that he was going to die, and this thought consumed him to the point where he could no longer function. He was paralyzed with fear, unable to continue on his journey. The suffering in his imagination was very real to Jack, and he felt it in every fiber of his being. He felt the cold of the ice water, the pain of being attacked, the despair of being lost and alone. His imagination was so vivid that it felt like he was living through these scenarios in real time. The stark reality of his situation was far less frightening than what he had imagined. It was at this moment of despair that Jack met a fellow adventurer. This stranger had a contagious energy and an unwavering confidence that inspired Jack to push through his fears. The stranger reminded Jack that he was more often frightened than hurt, and that his fears were often unfounded. This conversation was a turning point for Jack. He realized that he had been suffering more from his imagination than from the actual reality of the situation. He had been defeated by his own mind, and it had almost cost him everything. But now, with this newfound perspective, he was determined to take control of his thoughts and not let them control him. Jack began to focus on the present moment, not letting his mind wander into the realm of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. He learned to trust in himself and his abilities, knowing that he was capable of overcoming any obstacle that came his way. As he continued on his journey to the Klondike, Jack encountered many challenges and dangers. But he faced them head-on without giving in to his fears. He pushed himself to his limits, testing his physical and mental fortitude. The story of Jack London is a powerful reminder that our imagination can be both a blessing and a curse. It can inspire us to reach for the stars, but it can also hold us back from achieving our true potential. In Jack's case, his imagination almost cost him everything. But by learning to focus on the present moment and control his thoughts, he was able to overcome his fears. Interpretation of the rule. The Stoics believe that our perception of reality is often distorted by our emotions and desires, which can lead us to misinterpret events and create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. They believe that by cultivating the discipline of perception, we can learn to see things as they truly are, without being swayed by our emotions or biases. This discipline of perception is closely tied to the Stoic rule: we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. This rule reminds us that our perception of reality is often distorted by our fears and anxieties, which can cause us to imagine worst-case scenarios and create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. In practice, this rule encourages us to examine our fears and anxieties more closely and to distinguish between what is actually happening and what we are imagining might happen. For example, if we are afraid of flying, we might imagine all sorts of worst-case scenarios, such as the plane crashing or the engine failing. However, in reality, flying is actually one of the safest modes of transportation, and the chances of a plane crashing are extremely low. By examining our fears more closely, we can begin to see that they are often irrational and unfounded, and that we are more likely to suffer from our imagination than from reality. This realization can help us to overcome our fears and anxieties and to approach life with greater confidence and resilience. The discipline of perception also encourages us to see things from a broader perspective and to consider the bigger picture when making decisions. For example, if we are faced with a difficult situation at work, we might be tempted to react emotionally and lash out at our colleagues or superiors. However, by stepping back and examining the situation more objectively, we might realize that our anger is misplaced and that there are more productive ways to address the situation. In this way, the discipline of perception helps us to develop greater self-awareness and emotional intelligence, which can help us to navigate life's challenges with greater ease and effectiveness. It encourages us to see things as they truly are, without being clouded by our emotions or biases, and to approach life with a more rational and level-headed perspective. Ultimately, the Stoic rule: we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality, reminds us of the power of perception and the importance of cultivating a clear and rational perspective on life. By learning to see things as they truly are, and by distinguishing between our fears and reality, we can overcome our anxieties and approach life with greater confidence, resilience, and peace of mind. Let us learn to live in the present, and let us not worry ourselves about the future. For the future is not in our control, but the present is. Seneca. Implementation of the rule. Practice mindfulness meditation. During the practice, you can observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment or attachment, simply observing them as they arise and pass away. By doing this, you can become more aware of the thoughts and emotions that are rooted in fears and anxieties, and learn to distinguish them from the actual reality of a situation. With practice, this can help to cultivate a more objective and clear-minded perception of the world, allowing you to respond to situations with greater wisdom and resilience. So, remember this: most of your fear is not real, it's just your mind trying to protect you by imagining the worst. But you don't need protection from illusions, you need awareness. The next time fear tries to control you, pause and ask yourself, is this really happening, or is it just in my head? Because the moment you see the difference, you take your power back. And that is how you start mastering your mind. If this made you think differently, make sure to subscribe to Cold Truth Philosophy, because we're breaking down all 70 rules step by step in the simplest way possible. In the next video, Rule 3, we're going to uncover another powerful truth: why trying to control everything actually destroys your peace. and how letting go can make you stronger than ever.